She's an Emmy-winning journalist from the White House to war zones, telling all sides of the story. This is The Rita Cosby Show.
In the last few days, we are learning that there were up to 8 to 12 additional visits by business associates of Hunter Biden to the White House coming in 2016 when he was vice president, when President Biden was then vice president. And again, this comes on the heels of a report that there were prior to this about 10 to 12 other visits. So we're talking about 20 visits by business associates of Hunter Biden and of some of these similar ones that came over and over again. And Joe Biden wants us to believe he still has had no clue who they are, doesn't think there was ever any quid pro quo, doesn't think his son was anything other than this incredible business consultant, never met them, remember, he says. Do you believe him? And this also comes with new reports of some emails that many people are saying smoking guns that basically showed that more funds were going to, quote, the big guy. And there have been reports in the past that the big guy was President Biden. So where do you see this going? Well, coming up in just about 8 or 9 minutes from now here on The Rita Cosby Show, we are going to have John Solomon, great investigative journalist, to give us his take, because he has been studying, he's been following this case, he's been breaking some huge scoops on the Hunter Biden case, to talk about the Merrick Garland grilling on a whole bunch of topics, but especially where he sees the case of Hunter Biden going. We know that it's in the hands of a grand jury right now in Delaware. There's a U.S. attorney who is indeed investigating it. So it's not just, it's not just what the Washington Post and the New York Times wanted us to believe, hogwash for years, until they finally admitted, no, the laptop is real. There is definite evidence that he is for sure being investigated 1,000%, and multiple media outlets are now reporting that those efforts are stepping up, that indeed in the last few weeks particularly, they've been pulling in a whole bunch of former associates of Hunter Biden to question about Hunter Biden, to question about the president, to find out where does this go. And Republicans are now saying that if they get control of Congress, if they get control of the House or the Senate or both, they will absolutely call for hearings. There are a whole bunch of new reports that are just out. One, by the way, just coming out a few minutes ago from the New York Post, saying that the President Joe Biden agreed to cover more than $800,000 worth of bills racked up by his son, including legal fees tied to the winding down of his controversial overseas business dealings, and that was ahead of the 2022 election. Another report coming out from the Daily Mail saying that the laptop basically shows, again, the same thing with the legal fees, but this is a whopper too, that apparently due to an analysis by the dailymail.com of the president's financial records, it shows $5.2 million, that's with an M, $5.2 million in unexplained funds. So where does that go? And our next guest has been following the Hunter Biden case big time, and in fact had a bombshell report of his own. He's had a lot of them regarding this, talking about also some text messages that came out recently tied to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden that also show maybe Joe knew a lot more about his son's business dealings than he has ever exposed. And joining us now is the author of that great big blockbuster, John Solomon, who is the founder of Just the News. John, great to have you here on the show.
Great to be with you, Rita.
You know, you've had some great scoops on this. First off, let me just ask you about Merrick Garland, because the Attorney General today, as you know, was grilled before a Senate committee. And they were basically saying, you know what? Isn't it time for a special counsel? And how do we really know that Joe Biden and you, Merrick Garland, are not interfering with the investigation of his son? He clearly loves his son. He calls him the smartest guy he knows. And we know that he is definitely being investigated by that grand jury.
Yeah, listen, if Muhammad Ali were alive today, he'd be very proud of Merrick Garland. He did the rope-a-dope for most of the hearing today, ducked on most of the questions, weaved on others. He was unequivocal. He said, absolutely not, the president will not interfere in this, and I won't interfere with it. I'm going to let this go. Now, when I look at my reporting, what I'm seeing out in Delaware is a prosecutor, a Trump holdover, Weiss, who is actually conducting an investigation with a lot of activity before the grand jury. The activities of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware are very similar to what we saw John Durham doing last summer before he indicted Michael Sussman and then Igor Danchenko back-to-back in the Russia collusion case. So right now it does seem like the prosecutor has free rein, that he is investigating. He is calling the right people before the grand jury, people that we have seen show up in emails and business deals. So they seem to be asking for the right people, talking to the right persons, asking a lot of the right questions. Who's the big guy? Those are some of the questions that have come up. And I think at this point we have to watch and see what happens. I think there are some in the Republican Party who would like to see a special counsel. Here's the bad news about that from the other side. The other side says, and when I mean this, there are other Republicans who are worried that if you start a special counsel, it starts all over. This gets kicked past the election. We're in 2023, maybe even 2024 before we know what happens. Look how long it took for Durham to bring his first charges 2-3 years into his investigation. So there's a split thought in the Republican Party about this. Some would like to see the special counsel to have the independence. Some worry that it would slow down something that seems to be speeding towards a criminal indictment. So I thought there were two other headlines of Merrick Garland. I'll just quickly point out because I think they're both can be attributed to the failures of the Biden administration. He was asked about the potential of a terror attack, and he said he's very worried about ISIS-K coming in from Afghanistan. Well, how did that happen? Well, because of the way we exited Afghanistan under Joe Biden and the way that we failed to vet Afghan refugees before they were coming to the country. At least 23 we know had terrorist ties and were still led into this country by the Biden administration. Second thing, he was very honest about Title 42. Once it's lifted, the border's going to get way, way worse. So two interesting answers by Merrick Garland that go to the policy failures of President Biden.
Yeah, it is interesting. It was like when I was watching it, it was like, well, we don't really have a solution. In other words, okay, when 42 is lifted, it's going to be a disaster.
Yep.
And yes, we do have issues with security, as you mentioned, ISIS-K, again, vis-a-vis security. I think about rising crime across this country. There was a question about how do we combat that, and he was like, well, we sort of need to look here. He didn't have it just made it feel like it was rudderless from the top, and this is our top, law enforcement guy. So that, I agree with you, is a major, major concern. And the way he talks about ISIS-K and terrorists, you would think that kind of an answer would be, the right answer is, we'll secure our border, we'll protect our border, as opposed to, well, we're going to lift Title 42. That's really a way to secure our country,
Exactly. Yeah. No, listen, I think a lot of Americans already figured out this administration is going to do nothing on the border. It's a crisis that is already at epic proportions, and should Title 42 be lifted, I've heard estimates from the Border Patrol, from some of the Congress people who've been down at the border in the last few days, 18,000 illegal immigrants a day. That's 500,000, 600,000 a month, a surge unlike anything in American history. And you understand now why some folks like Kerry Lake and Mark Brnovich in Arizona and Ken Paxton in Texas are talking about this being treated as an invasion. That many people coming across the border unchecked feels like an invasion to some of those border states.
Yeah, it is a huge, huge concern. John, do me a favor. Can you stick with us? Because I want to carry you over to the next break and get more into the Hunter Biden, because you have done some explosive stuff. And I want to get an update from you. You mentioned about the grand jury seems to be doing some key work. Obviously, they're looking at taxes. They're looking at lobbying issues. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And when we come back, everybody, we're going to talk more with John Solomon of Just the News. We'll take a listen today. This is on the Senate floor. And this is Senator Hagerty, Republican Senator Hagerty, asking Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, about Joe Biden, and also, did he know about the business deals of his son? Talk about the entanglements of the money.
So it seems President Biden was serving as vice president and running U.S. foreign policy at the same time that his son, Hunter Biden, was raking in money from shady foreign business deals. And this was money that was being diverted to benefit Vice President Biden. So General Garland, do you have any reason to dispute the evidence that indicates that President Biden was involved with and using money from Hunter Biden's business deals?
Senator, following the long-standing rule of the Justice Department, we don't discuss investigations or evidence that may or may not be relevant to investigations. That's a matter for the United States Attorney's Office that's investigating the case.
In other words, I'm not saying anything. Well, someone who is sharing what he knows is investigative journalist John Solomon with Just the News. He continues now here on The Rita Cosby Show. John, I want to get back with you and ask you a question specifically about the grand jury. What exactly is there a potential they could come back with if they come back with an indictment? And how far away? You said that you think it's going to happen soon. Are we talking weeks? Are we talking months?
Yeah, listen, right now, the activity that you see before the grand jury is sort of consistent with what you see 1 to 2 months out before an indictment is handed up by the grand jury. Now, no one knows what this grand jury is going to do. We don't know exactly what they've heard. We have little glimpses and hints of it from witnesses and lawyers who are familiar with it. But right now, it's extremely active. And the best comparison I have is it's exactly what I saw last August and September in the grand jury in Washington, D.C. before John Durham brought those 2 blockbuster indictments against Michael Sussman and Igor Danchenko in the Clinton-Russia collusion hoax. And so the activity is very similar, very active, same sort of questions, same sort of people coming through. And I think the grand jury is looking at several things. When you listen to the witnesses, one of the questions is tax evasion. Did he fail to pay taxes? We know for sure he failed to pay taxes because there are letters on his laptop that we wrote about 2 years ago that show that he was told in 2016, at the end of his father's vice presidential term, you never paid taxes on all that money you got from Burisma, the Ukrainian company. Think about that. You take large payments from a foreign gas company and you don't pay taxes on it. Pretty audacious thing to do. We know they're looking at foreign lobbying. Was he trying to influence the United States government directly or indirectly on behalf of foreign clients? Did he fail to properly register as a foreign lobbyist? And then there's another element of this that has come in more recently, and it's best summarized by a document we turned up about 6 months ago at Just the News. It's an affidavit from 2 of Hunter Biden's former business partners, John Galanis, the father, and James Galanis, the son. They were both business associates. They both got convicted in a tribal scheme that several of Hunter Biden's business partners have been sentenced to prison over, fleecing an Indian tribe here in America of millions of dollars. And in their effort to win leniency, they went to the appeals court, and John Galanis wrote an affidavit saying, hey, listen, here's what was really going on with Hunter Biden. It was an influence peddling scheme. It was a pay-to-play. They would take millions of dollars from foreigners and promise them access to people in Washington. And some of the people have gone before the grand jury. Some of their lawyers are telling me that's one of the focal points. They're being asked, was all this money being paid to Hunter Biden not for services rendered, such as on Ukraine where he didn't have gas expertise? Was it simply money to get access to the very people that these foreigners wanted to do? Use a backdoor, Hunter Biden's backdoor, to get his father and other senior administration officials back in the day. And we know from a story I did a couple weeks ago, there are at least 5 documented meetings that we've been able to show at Just the News where Joe Biden sat and met or had contact with Hunter Biden's business partners. One was in Beijing in 2013 when he met the future business partner of Hunter Biden when he opened up a investment fund there. Another was his Ukrainian business partner from Burisma. Another was people associated with a Russian oligarch. So we know there are multiple instances where Joe Biden actually was meeting with the very people doing business with his son, and the grand jury is being asked to look at this question. Was that a pay-to-play scheme? Was that a corrupt pay-to-play scheme? And I think that's one of the questions they're wrestling with right now.
And by the way, think about the timing, and I know you understand it. I mean, here we're dealing with so much going on vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia. I mean, of all times right now, that's why I think it is extremely relevant. And the president's maintained, I've never met, my son's business partners. And now there's also a couple series of reports that have come out that basically say they were at the White House some 20 times. So what, he didn't know who his son was dealing with, but they showed up at the White House 20 times? That's a pretty coveted invitation.
Yeah, listen, one of the things we do know is that the original story is that Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, the Biden campaign gave the American people, in fact, the Democrats gave the American people during the first Trump impeachment story, they have been obliterated. They were false at the time. They were as false as Russia collusion was in 2016. And so that reckoning hasn't been fully there. The media put Hunter Biden in a protection bubble all through 2020. They hid the laptop. They hid the stories I was doing at the Hill. Now we're beginning to see that government officials, campaign officials, podium spokespeople, the president himself, when he looked in the camera multiple times, clearly didn't tell us the truth. And one thing we're now certain of is that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's finances were commingled. You mentioned the New York Post story. That actually quotes work that we did a few weeks ago. Hunter Biden in 2020 had lent his father so much money that his father actually signed over his Delaware tax refund in 2010. This is when Joe Biden is the vice president trying to pay back some of the money his son had been spending on his behalf. That included repairs at a beach home, a regular phone bill he was paying on behalf of the vice president. Years go by, 10 years later, and it's flipped around. At the end of the relationship going into the 2020 election, all of a sudden Joe Biden is being listed in emails as he's going to pick up hundreds of thousands of dollars of bills that now Hunter Biden owes. So they had a symbiotic, intertwined financial relationship over a decade, from 2009 to 2019. Now irrefutable. It's documented well. But at the time, the president looked into our cameras and said, I have no business dealings with my son. That's his business. Everything's above board. We now know so many of the stories they told us as they tried to win the election in 2020 were outright lies. They were falsehoods, and we're just beginning to get a sense of just how big that false portrait was.
Wow. Well, that is stunning. And again, I've seen the reports, a lot of them, again, quoting you guys as like $800,000. And you also have information on these text messages. Just like you said, it defies logic. And the White House still continues to say he doesn't have any, connection with his son's business dealings. It's just his son's dealing. He has no idea. And they maintain that. And yet there seems to be mounting evidence by far to the contrary. Thank you so much, John. Great work. And everybody check out Just the News and all the great reporting by John Solomon there. He is breaking this stuff left and right. John, thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Have a great night.
Thank you. Always great to have you on here. Thank you so much.
The transportation of fentanyl particularly has increased. Fentanyl is much easier. It's much more compact, much smaller, goes a longer way. The smugglers, particularly in the trucks, have developed ways to hide it even from our x-rays. Yeah. So that problem of fentanyl crossing the border has definitely increased in a way that makes all of us very worried.
All right. So fentanyl has increased to an issue where you could say, boy, isn't that a health crisis? It is claiming more American lives between the ages of 18 to 49 than anything else right now. That is really a health crisis, even bigger than the amount of deaths in that same time frame, basically, with American citizens for COVID. I mean, you look at it, you could say, okay, we'll put it in place for COVID, or we'll put it in place for fentanyl. You could find a reason, but you are not looking at it. This administration is refusing to even go there. No. It's a Biden. Biden's goal is to lift it. President Trump put this in place. We don't like it. We don't agree with it. We're going to lift it. It's like at the border, for some reason, there are 0 COVID cases with this administration. And to me, that is an utter dereliction of duty. Take a listen. Here's a little bit more with Senator Graham grilling the Attorney General Merrick Garland today about the border and Title 42.
Sort of back to the border, this idea of taking Title 42 out of the toolbox in terms of a way to deal with illegal immigrant crossings. Do you believe if Title 42 is repealed, there would be a surge at the border?
I think it's important for me to explain our role in this, and the Justice Department's only role is when the CDC makes its assessment, as it did, and asks us to appeal for us to determine whether that would be lawful. And the department concluded that the CDC's...
But you're in charge. I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
Yeah, and so that was so. I think, to answer the other part of your question, I think all intelligence suggests that there will be a large increase in the border, okay. Yes.
So there's a huge... overwhelming amount of fentanyl that is deadly and is claiming American lives. It's heartbreaking to see how many cases are happening. And in fact, they're saying younger and younger people are dying from overdoses with fentanyl as young as 12 and 13. So that is a huge problem in the United States. That's certainly a health crisis. That's a health emergency. And then you're also saying, well, when Title 42 gets lifted, yeah, we do expect a surge. I mean, this is the Attorney General who is buddies with Joe Biden. This is for the Biden administration. So then why are you lifting it? And you're lifting it at a time where you're saying that COVID is a major problem in the United States, so much so that now our Vice President of the United States has been testing positive. But yet it doesn't exist at the border? I mean, do you think we're delirious? Like we're a bunch of morons? Like we can't figure it out? I mean, this to me is so crazy. Take a listen. Here is the CDC's, this is sort of the coronavirus task force czar, if you will, for the White House, Dr. Jha, who came out today and he talked about Kamala Harris testing positive. Luckily, she's doing okay. But he said, you know what, we're really worried about the coronavirus. Take a listen.
The bottom line is that none of us can predict with any certainty where exactly this pandemic is going, what the virus is going to do next. All we can do is prepare. And that's what we need Congress to do, is to help us prepare and be ready for whatever eventuality comes.
And then he slammed Congress, saying Congress is blocking coronavirus funds because it is so pervasive right now. The virus is taking hold in a lot of people right now. And we need the money. We need the funds to keep our country safe. We need to protect our country. So listen to Dr. Jha. Again, this is sort of the coronavirus task force guy there for the White House, basically slamming Congress for not giving more coronavirus funds.
Treatments like these, vaccines that we have developed, these are the key essential tools that we're going to need to get through the rest of this pandemic. And that's the second part of the conversation I want to have with all of you. Because all of this requires funding from Congress. So far, Congress has not stepped up to provide the funds that are needed for our most urgent needs.
So Congress is not helping us. And yet Congress, especially the Republicans, have gone down to the border and have said, what the heck are you doing? You're admitting that more problems are going to happen the minute you lift Title 42, yet you refused basically to keep it in place for health reasons. I mean, it's unbelievable. They are making the case that the coronavirus is such a pervasive problem across this country, so much so that it's infected now the Vice President of the United States, and that they're making sure they're testing the president, making sure he's being quarantined, of big serious issues, right? But it's not an issue at the border. I mean, to me, this is such an utter case of hypocrisy. It's just screaming politics. They are pandering, and they are clearly doing it at American taxpayers and American citizens' expense. Let's go to Roger in Massachusetts, line 8. Go ahead, Raj.
All right, can you hear me?
I hear you crystal clear, Raj. Go ahead.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to recognize, I'll tell you how it makes sense. I thought about this about 2 years. 2 years ago, we got our census information pamphlet in the mail up in Massachusetts, which says in bold letters, everyone living according to the Constitution, it should be counted. Page 2 of this brochure was information on how to register to vote, and including the words, you can register within 10 days of an election. Now, we all know in 10 days of an election, no one's going to be able to verify 1 million applications for voter registration. So here we have coronavirus talk cropping up again, and people being distributed all through the country the past year. And we have an election coming up. We're going to have to do mail-in voting again because of the virus. And all Democrats have to do is mount a voter registration campaign going door to door to help people register. You know what I mean? There's no control. Anybody will be able to register to vote, and there'll be no one's going to check millions of applications, and they got a bunch of Democrat voters.
How scary is that, Raj? But you know what, Raj? It actually makes a lot of sense, Raj. And you're absolutely correct because they do get counted. And also they go toward census. They go toward how many representatives you have to population count. I mean, there's so many different levels here, voting too as well in a number of places. So with all of these things, you're right. It's like, what a coincidence. And now at a time where it looks like the Republicans will be very successful in November based on a lot of the polls right now. And given some of these policies, they just want Americans to just kind of ignore it. And just like you said, suddenly they get them all in. They're here. Oh, gosh, let's have amnesty, too. I mean, I also think they're even going to go one step further. I think they're going to try to make a lot of them citizens. I mean, we've already seen from Elizabeth Warren, she's already basically tipped the hand and she said the other day, yeah, there should be amnesty. She was on an interview with CNN over the weekend and said, you know what, yeah, I think all of these people, they should be coming in and then they should eventually get amnesty right away. I think that should happen quickly. I mean, if Elizabeth Warren and AOC and all these people had their way, they would have amnesty probably tomorrow. I mean, and you're right. November is right around the corner, and they would love to have as many votes as they can. That's a great one, Raj. Let's go to Judy on line 2. Go ahead, Judy, your thoughts.
Hi, Rita, wonderful show. This is the first time I've listened, and I really, really like it. I'm kind of course, agreement with the previous caller said, and it's along the lines of that. But I also think the reason they're so adamant about this thing, and nothing seems to be changing their minds, is because they're going to let in millions because they pretty much figure that they're going to lose at the midterms and maybe even 2024. But in a couple of years, they'll have millions of new, what they hope will be Democratic, socialist, maybe voters. And I think that's what they're looking for because they always think long range. They're really in for the long fight. And I really believe that that's what's going on. Nothing will stop them because there's millions new voters for them.
And you know what's interesting, Judy? I mean, no matter what happens with the House and Senate, and right now it looks like the House will probably turn towards Republicans. The Senate may turn. Both of them may turn. It's going to be really interesting. I think there's some really powerful signs pointing towards a Republican at least take over one of the houses. But remember, the president's going to stay there. So he could also say, I'm going to do an executive order, even no matter what happens after November. Hey, I'm going to do let's maybe give amnesty to all these people. Can you imagine suddenly, hey, whoever's in the country, maybe now I believe in border protection. Now that there's 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 million that happen to come into the country. What a surprise, But I think you're onto something, Judy. I really do. It's frightening. I mean, to me, it's frightening at a time where they're trying to make the argument that there's such a huge issue with coronavirus that they need more funds. And obviously, it's pervasive. Even the vice president has it now. But for some reason, at a place where people have been sleeping under a bridge and in very desperate situations to get to the U.S., I mean, you hear these heartbreaking stories. There's no coronavirus there. I mean, it's like it defies logic. Let's go to Lamar on line 7. Lamar, your thoughts. Lamar, are you there? Oops, we lost you, Lamar. Let's go to Stefano on line 6. Let's go to Stefano real quick. Steph, your thought.
Hi, Rita. Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you. Go ahead, Stefano.
Okay. So many thoughts. I actually think that what's going to happen is as we get closer to November, it's going to be like one of those situations where they can't fight the war on all fronts. And I think they're going to have to make a decision. So one side, it's going to be the border. And on the other side, it's going to be COVID. COVID being, we're going to push the COVID issue. So we're going to get those ballot harvesters out there. We're going to get all those same things that we used the last time. And we're going to try to stay where we are this time. The other one would be, of course, like the other lady said, and the guy from actually Massachusetts was spot on too. And like she said, let all the get as many people as you can in and look for down the line. But I think that right now they got their pedal on the they got their foot on the gas. They're not going to take it off.
Yeah, they clearly, Stefano, I agree with you. They are determined. And they are not shifting in policy. And in fact, I told you, like we heard Elizabeth Warren You know, her and AOC are basically like, yeah, we should bring them in. We should have amnesty. You know, if they had their druthers, they'd pick them up. They'd fly. They do flights to Guatemala and they'd do flights to everywhere around the world and say, come on in. It's really frightening, guys. Have a good night.